Chapter 2. The Beginning of Mathematics and Geometry. How better to begin our substantially new manner of thinking than with the creation of the earth from the creation of the table of elements, and turn that into the creation of vegetation and biology. Let us move on to day 3. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. Genesis 1:9-13. Well, as a result of the commands, "Let there be light," and the firmament, and before the command of "Let the dry land appear," there had to be some materials to build with. Those materials are the elements which we have sorted and categorized today as the periodic table of elements. All matter in the universe is made of enormous amounts of these elements that, at their very foundation, are nothing more than electromotive waves combined from infinity layer upon layer to create substance. Here is a table of the amounts of these elements in the universe, the earth, and you. What should be able to be interpreted here is that we all came from a primordial soup, so in a sense evolutionists are correct. But not a big slime pond located here on Earth like you might imagine from an evolutionary biological perspective. The primordial soup we came from is that of the waters under the firmament. This was not necessarily liquid water, as was stated earlier, but more like a soup of energies compressing, combining, and creating harmonic compounds. Any dissonance would simply cancel out instantaneously, out from the infinite to create elements. In this soup, in the beginning, it would be possible to say that the concentrations of elements available would be similar to the ratios above. Then, as they were brought together by a command, they began to be used in certain measures like that of a baker. Hence, today we have the percentages seen above left over. Now, because of the laws of thermodynamics, all this coming of age is also reversible in that it will break back down into its constituent elements. Consequently, being one of the laws of chemistry as well. Fairly easily, then we can imagine that it was the elements in the everywhere at once magnetic field called the waters, not necessarily a giant pool of water that was brought together, and the substance that was formed was all the planets, all the dry land inside the whole universe. As a result of the drawing together of all the elements to form types of abundant compounds, ergo water on and in the planet, they would have created all kinds of water on other planets besides Earth, namely Mars, Venus, Uranus, perhaps Mercury and others, as well as fee vapor and ice in space itself. But their relative distances to what will later be created, the sun and stars, evaporated the water or froze the water of other dry lands in our solar system and beyond. So water is not necessarily the, "Oh, there must be life on that planet," on switch, it seems to be. Consequently, since there is no life anywhere else in the known universe, around 70 million stars, many of them much older than our own, this is overwhelming proof against evolution, and it is readily observable. It was the interaction of sound, God's voice, and magnetism, God's Holy Spirit, that created the electromagnetic spectrum, the Son of God. It is this same electromagnetic sine wave spreading outward in all directions that comprises all other observed frequencies in the universe, i.e. sound, light, color, radio, X-ray, gamma ray, and cosmic ray, etc. Comprises all energy, i.e. joule, calorie, volt, hertz, Tesla, Gauss, etc. All mass, i.e. grams, pounds, etc. and is the initiator of all mathematics and shape. So here is what I propose, that from the outward in all directions, movement of this electromotive sound spectrum through the zero-point energy field, All matter was formed from the infinitely smallest particles to the largest galactic bodies. And if there is possible to be life, created such, with all its would come diversity on its surface. The harmonic interaction of this diversity within separate groups, called kinds, is what we observe today as microevolution. This will provide a mechanism for sound to be the force behind the formation of Earth and all its vegetation as initiated by God in the text above. The movement of one field through another will create eddies. This is evidenced in weather patterns where warm fronts come in contact with cold fronts or the Gulf Stream changes directions. This is similar to the quote mentioned earlier about sound condensations and rarefactions, areas of greater pressure compared to lesser pressure. Here is a diagram created by midshipman Pamela Phillips, U.S. Naval Academy, and Richard Gasparovich, Applied Physics Laboratory, Johns Hopkins University. Could the stars themselves be so simple in their construction that they are merely cold core or warm core ring formations? Similarly, as an electric charge moves through a magnetic field, we get a diagram that looks like this. This diagram shows the movement of one field, an electric field, moving through another field, a magnetic field that will create eddies, eventual particles. If you look at these two diagrams, then one could deduce that light is only an electric wave moving through a magnetic field, and that this movement will create the dual wave nature of light. Enter Lorentz force law, where we get our right-hand rules. If the charge is moving in the z-plane, perpendicular to the magnetic field lines, in the y-plane, then the force on the charge is going to be perpendicular to both, in the x-plane. This is similar to a boat moving across a still pond. Gravity, the magnetic field, is in the y-plane. The boat, our charge, is moving perpendicular to that field in the x-plane, so the wake from the boat spreads outward in the z-plane. But the boat is not dual characteristic. The difference here from our boat on the water is that the charge is an accelerating sinusoidal wave. Not only that, but since the magnetic field is fluctuating, then it is traveling in a helical similar to a spinning vortex. Obviously, as the charge moves in this fashion, so also will there be a move of the magnetic field equal and perpendicular. This is similar to Newton's third law of action and reaction, where the disruption of the magnetic field lines can only be equal to the amplitude of the moving charge or the radius of the helical path, hence identical amplitudes or the diameter of the circle DE equals 2r. But if you look above to the creation of Eddy's diagram, you see that it is moving in a sine wave also. From this then, we can see that the period from node to node, or a single cycle of the electric helical sine wave through the fluctuating magnetic ZPE field, creates a spinning charged particle that can break off from the wave itself. This is the beginning of the formation of substance in the hologram of the universe. As the whole is divided into particles, they retain all of the information of the whole it came from, hence particle, which we described earlier. Maxwell's idea is that a magnetic field can be caused not only by a normal electric current, but also by a changing electric field or changing electric flux. This is all relevant to music and God's voice in that these terms lead also to the definition of timbre, which is the combination of qualities or richness of a sound that makes it different from other sounds of the same pitch and volume, hence isotopes. Since the bright line spectra of the elements was discovered after the periodic table was set up, I think subconsciously people think that the spectra are a result of the element when, in fact, the elements are a product of their spectra or electromagnetic wave configuration. Need experimental proof? Well, to prove this, we need some serious mathematics. And you know what? Music is actually mathematics at its very core. Since math is the only way to actually prove anything, and God used this to speak everything into existence, then the logical next step is to attempt to prove all this mathematically. By understanding the number phi, we can see that truly all things are upheld by the word of God's power. Jesus Christ, being the brightness of God's glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high. Hebrews 1:3.
Before we study some interesting things about that number phi and the characteristics of creation, we need to take a quick vocabulary lesson to help tie some ideas about waves and their interactions together. Coherence is a property of waves that measures the ability of waves to interfere with one another. Two waves can be combined to produce an unmoving distribution of constructive and destructive interference, a visible interference pattern, depending on the relative phase of the waves at their meeting point. A wave can also be coherent with itself, a property known as temporal coherence. Not to get ahead of myself, but before the fall of Adam and Eve, all of creation was coherent with the nature of our Creator. After, we became temporally coherent interference patterns of ourselves. Hence, you have a time to live and a time to die. Yet, this would be reconciled through Christ. Interference is known as coherence time of the wave. From this, a corresponding length, as in the length of the days of man, can be calculated. The temporal coherence of a wave is related to the spectral bandwidth of the source. A truly monochromatic, single-frequency wave would have an infinite coherence time and length. This, then, is the infinite EM wave created on day 2, from which everything will spring forth and become visible by its coherence. This is the time-space continuum. Waves also have the related property of spatial coherence. This is the ability of any one spatial position of the wavefront to interfere with any other wavefront. This is a property of a wave to be able to maintain coherence as it is bended and folded and compressed while the electric field is passing through the magnetic field in the beginning. An example of this type of coherence, folding, bending, and compressing, is in your DNA. Spatial coherence is high for spherical and plane waves as it is related to the size and coherence of the light source. In creation, this would be the band of the EM wave from which each object would eventually come out. If you think of Young's double-slit experiment, the interference pattern is the connect the dot of the image. Connecting the dots creates sinusoidal waves, and the whole process repeats itself. A non-monochromatic point source of 0 diameter emits spatially coherent light. And this is what an electron essentially is. A spherical, static, electric field wave whose vortexing spin is 0 diameter, thus it emits a spatially coherent light. Holography, a three-dimensional image, substance, matter, requires temporally or spatially coherent light. In black and white, or color, photography, every point of the picture records just one thing: the intensity of the light wave, the squared amplitude of the electric field at that point. But in a hologram, a three-dimensional photo, the light which makes up the real scene is not only specified by the amplitude and wavelength of the electric field, but also its phase. The phase of a wave is the relation of a particular feature of the wave to its reoccurring feature in another part of its form. Phase can be measured as time, distance, or as an angle. Hence the appearance of a multidimensional object from the lines of sinusoidal waves, which is the mechanistic process of all creation. The next few terms are derived from Dan Winter and his theories on sacred geometry. Ecstatic process results in a concentric, sharing same center origin, wave nesting, that phase locks or brings into focus at one point waves of increasing cascades of different lengths. In quantum or wave terms, this engages the principle of self-organization among pressure waves, which occurs whenever they are brought to focus. This is because in wave interference patterns, drawn to the focal point attracted by symmetry-making in geometry, to get waves of increasing cascades and lengths so focused or phase-locked that worlds within worlds of wavelength and embodiment converge to share inertia. Inertia is the conservation of linear momentum or angular momentum of a spinning object, meaning it will maintain its motion until acted on by another force. Embeddability is the ability of a short wave to embed or nest non-destructively in a larger one, similar to fractality. Note how this is immersive in the sense that it allows one oscillator to enter another. This is equally similar to wave geometry, which can survive compression non-destructively to inhabit or get inside of another wave. Actually, since these two patterns would likewise be rotating in a helical pattern, the diagram on the right is quite similar to the construction of DNA. Actually, if you added the diagram on the right to the diagram on the left, you would have exactly a double helix. Further, this action would cause the line to become bent towards itself to make a wavelength similar to a chromosome. Fractal is when the small part of a pattern contains a miniature of the whole pattern. This is said to be self-embedded or recursive. This kind of symmetry among waves permit the long wave to cascade right into the same pattern in the short wave, creating a vortexing attractor, whose output serves as the input of the next. This process is exactly the same manner in which the golden ratio is derived. Two parents produce a child. Fractionation, the opposite of fractality, is when the order of a complex, woven kind of self-organizing body is chopped up into little pieces. Among waves, spin is the only retainer for memory. The context of the long wave is not present after a body is passed through a screen or sieve. Fractionation is the method of science to find the God particle, which supposedly is the unifying particle of everything. When, in truth, the unifying particle of everything is the long wave, that wave of the full, eternal, complete EM spectrum. This fractionation phenomenon can also be seen in the usage of drugs, medicine, and dietary supplements, and proves their absolute inefficacy. You simply cannot extract an element from its whole and pretend to understand its value to the whole human body. The only outcome is that you will try to add this extraterrestrial wave in and throw the harmonic system into imbalance, creating dissonance. The long-term usage of such medicine is called side effects, which will then be treated in the same manner. The long-term effect of side effects will increase to more dissonance and disease. This principle goes back to embeddability, and you slowly begin to decay the organism, and it ages and dies faster than if you had not treated it at all. But embedding the long wave into the organism will lead it back to healing and life. Non-destructive interference occurs as all waves or frequencies cross each other in the universe and begin to create new waves. The process of making new waves from two interfering waves is called conjugal, similar to humans. This means they create a continuous system of interference loosely called heterodyning. If the new waves are to fit within the wave nest, they must add each other's wavelengths repeatedly each time they do this crossing. This event, likewise to embeddability, is similar to the propagation of the Fibonacci series. In essence, as this becomes a recursive event, these waves begin to add and multiply each other simultaneously. This perfected embedding creates, according to the phi ratio, perfect branching called phyllotaxis. A representative of this in nature is the sunflower head and the leaves on plants as they grow in a pattern so that they share the same amount of sunlight. Embedding according to this phi ratio effectively eliminates the destructive adding or multiplying of these waves or dissonance. The results of these constructions are infinitely capable of repeating. Recursion refers to the wave or system that is able to infinitely steer, return, or re-enter oneself, hence, able to recur. This ability for a wave to perform this action is also called self-reference. This can be easily demonstrated by holding a mirror up to a mirror and looking at the infinite reflections. A golden mean spiral is the only way a wave can re-enter itself non-destructively. Well, now that we understand a method and mechanism for the creation of particles, how do you go from particles to inert objects and from inert objects to biological life? Before we cascade into the next level, try to think back about the ideas and experiments for holographs, reaction time in the universe, ZPE field, sound, light, and the vocabulary we learned, and how we incorporated all these ideas to create particles from waves from the EM spectrum, and how sound is the major force to cause their interactions. This will become important because the centripetal, directed towards the center, origin of matter from ether, by a nonlinear vortex compression, counterthrust to entropy, is its embeddability. The path out of chaos for any oscillator, periodic flux between two things based on changes in energy. This is an appearance of matter from things which you cannot see, which is the true meaning, and where we get the idea of something from nothing. Although loosely, that is erroneous thinking. You cannot see light, the EM spectrum, or sound waves until they are reflected off of something else. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of the things which do appear.
Hebrews 11:3. So how did God create visible, tangible matter from invisible, intangible light, sound, and a magnetic field? The interactions of these three created changes in energy, resulting in periodic flux that began to fold magnetic and electric fields inwardly, and this resulted in creating a geometric construct of shape. The construct would not be visible to our eyes, but as these changes in periodic flux began to occur, the particles or elements L is the Hebrew word for God, began to be attracted to certain lines of this invisible geometric construct. Since we now understand the importance of music to creation and then sound effects fields of energy, i.e., timbre, pitch, amplitude, frequency, etc., then let's begin to add rhythm, reverberation, scales, chords, etc. to our masterpiece. What I mean here is that if we double the process described in this section of embeddability, then these newly formed waves and shapes begin to fold themselves and further create changes based on the addition of further musical sonic changes, creating changes in energy patterns. All of a sudden, these patterns begin to recur infinitely, and God has just created gravity. Magnetism is the energy in motion between frequencies. This is the scalar wave we have called gravity, where gravity is most dense. Capacitive power spectra is the power of phi golden mean ratio. When magnetic lines braid, only certain wavelengths will fit non-destructively upon the length of other waves by the phi ratio. Waves can accelerate through light speed. This braid can be influenced by sonic waves directly embedding into planets and stars by this principle of waves inhabiting or embedding larger waves. Embeddability is perfected recursion. This perfected recursion pertaining to a rule or procedure that can be applied repeatedly in an upward and outward pattern, just like the universe with the firmament, is the meaning of the word incarnation. Webster's dictionary explains incarnate as to put into or represent in a concrete form, and a body or thing regarded as embodying or exhibiting some quality, idea, or the like. Isn't this what science observes all around us in laboratories? It only observes the concrete form of substance harmonic electric and magnetic field interactions that exhibit qualities and characteristics without ever knowing why, from where, or how it came to be so. Based on this premise, atheists can't believe in science or religion because it can't explain why or how something began or came to be, but only that it is. They want to accept that their worldview is eternal and never had a beginning. Yet they cannot accept an eternal God from religion because they say believers can't explain where God came from. This is textbook hypocrisy. Yet further we are taught that we can never know the truth because science cannot test such things as why, only that it is concrete, meaning it is there and it is doing something. Over and over you will hear scientists say that how and why are for philosophers and religion. I ask you why it is that we accept such a dark dogma as, that's just the way it is. And I tell you why. It is for the simple reason that if you attempt to ask why or lest why, you will see God and Christ. And I tell you there are vested interests in you, never knowing the information that comes from asking and proving why. Once you know why, once you see God and His Christ all around you, you become very powerful. The vested interests cannot control that power, and you will no longer be slaves to the darkness of, that's just the way it is. The pinnacle and foundation of atheistic philosophy, blindness. Jesus the Messiah said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." The Fibonacci series includes any series of numbers that derives an integer from any two other integers before it that are larger than 0. The ratio of any two sequential numbers in the series will tend to phi. What this means is that 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, etc., never ending. So the series of integers becomes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And the ratios are 1 divided by 1 equals 1, 2 divided by 1 equals 2, 5 divided by 3 equals 1.6666 until you get to a mean ratio of 1.618034. The Fibonacci series encompasses all of creation. This includes the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost in compass. This irrational number is the connector to every shape, sound, color, and life. The definition of incarnation is perfected incursion, which is a rule that can be applied repeatedly. This number can be applied to the whole of creation, from the infinitely small to the galactically large, and encompass all variability in between. Think back to how I tried to show how two-dimensional lines can be sonically manipulated to make three-dimensional sphere. Even more surprising is that the Fibonacci brick shows a simple relationship between pi and phi, using the values for the diagonal d length 2 that we have just found and the surface area S4 phi. If we imagine the brick tightly packed into a sphere, the center of the sphere will be halfway along diagonal d. So the radius of the sphere will be 1, and its surface area will be 4 pi. We showed above that the surface area of the brick, S, is 4 phi. Putting these two together, we have the ratio of the surface areas of the Fibonacci brick, and its surrounding sphere is phi pi. On many plants, the number of petals is a Fibonacci number. Buttercups have 5 petals, lilies and iris have 3 petals, some delphiniums have 8, corn marigolds have 13 petals, some asters have 21, whereas daisies can be found with 34, 55, or even 89 petals. The same happens in many seed and flower heads in nature. The reason seems to be that this arrangement forms an optimal packing of the seeds, so that no matter how large the seed head, they are uniformly packed at any stage, all the seeds being the same size, no crowding in the center, and not too sparse at the edges. So the number of spirals we see in either direction is no different for larger flower heads than for small. On a large flower head, we see more spirals further out than we do near the center. The numbers of spirals in each direction are almost always neighboring Fibonacci numbers. Why does nature like using phi in so many plants? The answer lies in packing the best arrangement of objects to minimize wasted space. Botanists have shown that plants grow from a single group of cells right at the tip of any growing plant, called the meristem. The amazing thing is that a single fixed angle can produce the optimal design, no matter how big the plant grows. So, once an angle is fixed for a leaf, say that leaf will least obscure the leaves below, and then be least obscured by any future leaves above it. Similarly, once a seed is positioned on a seed head, the seed continues out in a straight line pushed out by other new seeds, but retaining the original angle on the seed head. No matter how large the seed head, the seeds will always be packed uniformly on the seed head. The arrangements of leaves is the same as for seeds and petals. All are placed at 0.618034 leaves, seeds, petals per turn. This is also a look into the creation of particles mentioned earlier. As light electric charge moved through the ZPE field, tiny vortices began to form, seeds if you will. These vortices began to form closely knit packages, fundamental particles, which all began to spin like electrons in a valence shell, the seed head. The braiding embedding of these frequencies begin to create compounds of charges who come together to form atoms, then compounds. This embedding, packing, spinning creates a bending of the magnetic field, pulling other complementary charges together in gravatic fashion. As this process keeps repeating itself, compounds begin to take on the shape of elements, and compounds of elements take on geometric structure. This leads us into the infinite geometric shape, layer upon layer, of the whole universe and everything in it, and a man named Roger Penrose and Penrose tiling. In 1974, Roger Penrose discovered an aperiodic tiling that only uses 2 shapes, nicknamed kites and darts. The tiles can be prevented from tiling periodically by putting notches and tabs on the edges of the tiles, but a more aesthetic approach is to color the tiles. There are an infinity of Penrose tilings. The infinite sun pattern contains a decagon at its center instead of a star. Penrose tilings have a number of astonishing properties. One is that any finite portion of any tiling is contained an infinite number of times in every other tiling. This means that you cannot tell by examining a piece of tiling which pattern you are on. No finite patch of tiling can force a tiling, determine the rest of the tiling. Only at their infinite limits are the different patterns distinguishable, a finite patch of infinite star. Pattern might only be a local piece of some other pattern, but there is also an infinite star pattern that has five-fold symmetry to infinity. Only if you know the characteristics of the pattern to infinity can you tell. It is at these patterns to infinity that we can tell what properties certain elements have, and the construction of matter becomes visibly incarnate. It is from this position that we can determine the characteristics of the pattern and its physical properties that begin to distinguish it from other elements and compounds that possess their own unique electrical and magnetic properties, such as diamagnetic, slightly repelled, paramagnetic, slightly attached, ferromagnetic, strongly attached. Ferromagnetic materials are the most important in relation to this time of creation and the command for dry land to appear. As you are imagining this, don't forget that this was a command for the dry land to appear. This did not just happen by chance collisions. Since the universe is 97.98% gas and only 0.2% solid material, then it is safe to say that actual heavy non-gas elements would have been suspended very far apart from each other within the firmament, hence dust in space. The process of pulling these elements together takes an electromotive force at a specific frequency and pitch to pull out the foundational material from out of the waters. That foundational material was ferromagnetic. The way all the dry land is going to appear is the same as the phi-pi ratio and 3D Penrose tiling combined. Also, don't take our context so literally to presume that the only dry land is on one single place, Earth. A tree can be in one place, but its branches and buds are in many places of that one tree. Actually, if you can visualize this correctly, then the top of any vegetation becomes the same pack as the seed head. This same pack can be seen in the pack of our galaxy and our universe. Now imagine this growth and packing, not only upward and outward from the ground to the sky, but also from east to west, and in every direction of the compass, including toward and away from you, and you will begin to see the coming together of all the materials for the Earth, including the one down to infinity inside the atom. Hence, the incarnation of all matter, from sine waves using one set of numbers, the golden series, and two shapes which we call kites and darts, Occam's razor. Very magnetic materials have the optimal qualities to make them the solid core of the Earth. First of all, these materials are highly permeable, meaning that it will allow magnetic flux through more easily than all other elements, because they have their own magnetic field and have high electrical resistivity. Also, these elements require a specific crystalline structure, which works perfectly with the phi-pi ratio shapes similar to our brick in a sphere. The next layer that would become more attractive to the spinning, braiding, bending core would be all the ferromagnetic elements. But there is a massive spin growing upward and outward like an unimpeded tornado or hurricane. It just keeps getting bigger. Therefore, it is pulling inward all types of magnetic materials, paramagnetic, antiferromagnetic, and even diamagnetic. Therefore, it is pulling inward all types of magnetic materials, paramagnetic, antiferromagnetic, and even diamagnetic. The concentrations of the greater magnetic elements would be greater towards the center and lesser outward. The piling and heaping of the material is creating pressure on the spinning core, but the outer core would become a thick layer of ferrofluid that would not impede the spin of the core of ferrimagnetic materials. Then, as the concentration of the ferrofluid elements began to lessen, a massive crust of suspended paramagnetic materials will begin to form, creating the mantle. The greatest concentrations of ferromagnetic elements would be in the upper 5 to 10 miles of mantle, which we call the Earth's crust. Lastly would be the hierarchy of diamagnetic materials, being pulled in by the rush of heavier elements as they were attracted lower in the Earth and earlier in the process, even though diamagnetic elements slightly repel one another. The heaviest of these compounds, water, would orient itself wherein places of greatest pressure within the mantle could no longer push it upward, effectively orienting it in caverns within and lakes upon the upper 5 to 10 miles of crust.
as certain gases, elements of the Earth, then would also act like a magnetic field that would bend the light, the constructive embedding of electric waves and magnetic waves in the universe to create the magnetosphere. This magnetosphere around the spinning Earth is actually a giant torus shape, like a hollow donut. Actually, in almost every type of fruit and seed, this same type of configuration is found, simple coincidence or efficiency of design. But this magnetosphere is the resultant of all the other magnetic and electric elements of the whole Earth. Here is what NASA has to say about the magnetosphere. So, our Earth has a magnetic field that reaches far out into space. It just so happens that our Sun sends more than light to the Earth. Besides light, the Sun sends tiny, little pieces of matter to the Earth. These pieces of matter are moving very fast when they come close to the Earth. In fact, they are moving so fast that scientists call this the solar wind. The solar wind squashes the Earth's magnetic field. As you can see in the picture above, the magnetic field lines on the Sun's side of Earth, left are squashed, and on the side of the Earth, away from the Sun. Right? The magnetic field lines are stretched out as if the wind is trying to blow them away. Earth's magnetic field does a pretty good job of standing up to the solar wind. A great deal of the matter in the solar wind is pushed sideways around the Earth by the Earth's magnetic field. The magnet of the Earth pushes these particles sideways so they don't hit the Earth head-on. The Sun produces a hot gas that travels through space at 1,000,000 miles per hour, carrying particles and magnetism outward past the planets. In essence, the Earth is immersed in the Sun's atmosphere. And thanks to the Earth's magnetic field, the solar wind is stopped and deflected around the Earth so that most of it does not hit our atmosphere head-on. Our neighboring planet, Mars, which has little or no magnetic field, is thought to have lost much of its former oceans and atmosphere to space. This loss was caused, at least in part, by the direct impact of the solar wind on Mars' upper atmosphere. The interaction between the solar wind and the plasma of the magnetosphere acts like an electric generator, creating electric fields deep inside the magnetosphere. Ultraviolet rays from the Sun ionize the upper atmosphere, creating the electrically conducting ionosphere and a source of plasma for the magnetosphere. The energy from the solar wind enters the magnetosphere and is stored there. This explains why, by the design of an all-knowing creator, the Earth, in Genesis cosmology, had to be created before the Sun. If it were not set up and running properly all at once before the Sun was created, then the particles flowing outward from the Sun would have destroyed all chances of any type of atmospheric generation or water. If evolution and the Big Bang, and religionists who misinterpret the Genesis record, are correct and the Earth was formed after the Sun, then the demise of Mars would have been the demise of Earth. The magnetosphere and the atmosphere had to come before the creation of the Sun, which, in the Genesis account, is on day 4, and we are only discussing day 3. So, what God created was basically a giant transformer, like the ones we see all around us today. Transformer, electrical device used to transfer an alternating current or voltage from one electric circuit to another by means of electromagnetic induction. Electromagnetic induction is the production of an electromotive force in a conductor as a result of a changing magnetic field about the conductor. The simplest type of transformer consists of 2 coils of wire, electrically insulated from one another, and arranged so that a change in the current in one coil, the primary, will produce a change in voltage, in the other, the secondary. In many transformers, the coils are wound on a core made of a material with high magnetic permeability. This intensifies the magnetic field induced by the current in the primary, increasing the transformer's efficiency. Among the most common passive electromagnetic devices in use, transformers enable very efficient change of alternating current AC voltage from one value to another at constant frequency. Providing different input voltages to multiple power supplies in industrial equipment is a frequent application. Voltage level is raised or lowered by electromagnetic inductance between the device's input power source and output load side, which in a basic transformer consists of a primary coil and a secondary coil of insulated copper wires wound around an insulated steel core. So the Earth is a mantle-insulated core made of a material with high magnetic permeability, ferrimagnetic, whose primary power source is the interaction between the solar wind and the plasma of the magnetosphere that acts like an electric generator, creating electric fields in the Earth. The application of which is to provide different input voltages to multiple power supplies by electromagnetic inductance. So where are the power lines between the sun and the Earth, like the power lines between the poles we see on the street? Where are the receivers of all this energy? You guessed it. Every blade of grass, every tree, and every flower. These are the energy receivers thrive and bank. Where will every bug, animal, and human get its energy to thrive and grow from? You guessed it, by withdrawing from the energy bank. Now, are you beginning to see why the perfect construction of the Earth is so important? Why the speed of its inception could never be billions of years, nor 24 hours, but almost instantaneous? And why it had to be created in a very special order with all kinds of diversity and social order? Need experimental proof? Change the diet of a lab rat to only man-made. Processed food and candies without any natural substances whatsoever. Further, compound this with man-made, completely synthetic, vitamin and mineral supplements and see how long it lives compared to a lab rat that is fed an all-natural, completely organic diet from only Earth materials, and see how long and how well it lives. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. We need to show a way for the conversion of this inert Earth to the biological vegetation of the Earth, the energy receptors. Dr. Ross Gunn, a civilian scientist for the US Navy, stated years ago that the Earth is a huge generator, generating over 200 million amperes of electric current continuously. The Earth has been shown by Dr. Gunn and others to have a negative charge amounting to 400,000 coulombs. Yet 6 feet above the ground, the air is charged with more than 200 watts positive with respect to the ground. It has been calculated that the Earth's surface has a continuous discharge into the atmosphere of 1/800 coulomb. At this rate, the Earth would lose 90% of its charge into the air in 1 hour, yet the Earth's charge doesn't diminish. Where does the Earth's energy source come from? The conversion of matter to energy is accepted. Now, of course, the conversion of energy into matter must also be accepted. As one travels down to the almost infinitesimal constituents of the atom, one finds that matter does not exist at all as realistic substance which we have supposed it to be. There at the very foundation, it consists of nothing more than charges emitted at various wavelengths or frequencies. It has been agreed that all forms of matter are vibrating at a particular rate of frequency. And so it is with various forms of energy, heat and light, magnetism and electricity. These are but forms of vibratory motion connected with and being generated from the same source, the universe. Our starting point from the discovery of these different waves, cosmic and gamma and beyond, was electrical conductivity of the air, and it has been found that this conductivity is just as strong by night as by day, which further explains why Earth and vegetation can be created before our sun. Radiations emitted by the sun or distant stars and galaxies can scarcely be the sole cause of this energy. All space is saturated with vibration, the initial sound of God's voice, the light of Christ energies, which are no doubt electrical in character. The relation of matter to energy and energy to matter then becomes the potential of the universe, one continuous series of oscillations. Day 1, creation. Light. The electron theory has superseded the earlier theories now, and while the electron theory explains the observed and theoretical facts better than the previous concepts did, could it be that, as the greater light of knowledge leads us on, the electron theory will fall short of providing absolute knowledge? The Einstein theory may stand in need of revision or amendment, or in time, just like the theories of corpuscles or waves, be put on the back shelf. The awesome nature of this information and creation is, not only are pi and phi proportionally related, so is matter and frequency, in that every substance in the universe, at its very smallest observable foundation, is nothing more than energy charges emitted at various wavelengths or frequencies. We also know that music which you create with every uttered noise out of your mouth, ergo speaking, the sound of God's voice, is all based on frequencies, meaning all frequency, vibration, oscillation in the universe is making some type of sound, hence C equals C. Further, this means that everything that exists in the universe has a name that can be called or issued a command to which it will respond, and that name is the frequency at which it vibrates. The reason this seems so hard to believe is because we think that we hear all the sounds of frequencies there are to hear. But this is untrue. To prove this, go out and buy a dog whistle and blow it. Most people cannot hear the sound of that whistle because the pitch is too high. Let's take a quick lesson here. The universe is composed of an infinite number of frequencies, some macroscopically large and some microscopically small. All exist in uncountable phase relationships with one another. The colors of light, the sound of music, the smell of flowers, the touch of velvet, all are made of combined frequencies. Some are in phase and adding to, some are out of place and cancel from, a multitude of vibrations. Our five senses are capable of interpreting these particular waves and making them tangible to our perception. Beyond these senses, most of us have to rely on artificial means to convert these frequencies to the range of our comprehension. 1 hertz is equal to 1 vibration per second. Any frequency below 20 vibrations is known as infrasound. Any frequency above 20,000 hertz is known as ultrasound. Humans can only hear frequencies that oscillate between 2,000 and 20,000 vibrations per second, 2,000 and 20,000 hertz. A dog can hear frequencies between 50 to 45,000 hertz. A cat, 45 to 85,000 hertz. A bat, up to 120,000 hertz. And a dolphin can detect frequencies observed up to 200,000 vibrations per second. The highest frequencies observed to date come from space and are named cosmic ray photons. They vibrate at over 100 sextillion hertz. Now, where did I leave that cosmic ray photon whistle lying around at? Another interesting phenomenon to note here is that all color is also based on these frequencies. Remember that everything is coming out from the same long wave, the all. Again, we only see a very tiny amount of these frequencies, but the correlations are important. So, when you see the color red, this means that all other waves are being absorbed by the material except the waves that are vibrating at red frequency. The colors we can see are all in the rainbow. Red is vibrating at 461 trillion hertz. All these numbers have 12 zeros after them. Yellow at 526 hertz, green at 588 hertz, blue at 631 hertz, indigo at 674 hertz, and violet at 750 hertz. This means that everything we can see vibrates from 460 trillion to 750 trillion hertz. Anything vibrating above or below those frequencies will be invisible to our naked eye. Actually, this is what your five senses were created to do. Sense the world around you based entirely on frequencies. Do you see what I am implying here? You can hear, see, smell, and touch vibrations, which are the spoken word of God. All sound equals white light, slowed down for you to be able to perceive and interpret them, which is why time will be invented on day 4. But I am getting ahead of myself. Scientific laboratory proof. Go to a sound lab and listen to some piano scales, and you will be hearing the color of sound and the sound of color. If you take the frequencies of visible light and transpose them down to the range of our hearing, i.e. the piano, then you get the following. Based on C equals 256 hertz and the doubling of frequencies 41 times to find their Hertzian octave in the band of visible light, C equals green, C sharp equals blue-green, D equals blue, D sharp equals blue-violet, E equals violet, F equals red, violet, F sharp equals red, G equals red, orange, G sharp equals orange, A equals yellow-orange, A sharp equals yellow, B equals yellow-green. This becomes important as we begin to look at the periodic table of elements as the physical letters of the alphabet of God in constructing everything attached to the earth. The alphabet of God is three-dimensional in sound, light, color, and electricity, and geometry, shape, and magnetism.
The periodic table of elements containing the elements of Earth, and therefore all creation, are likewise three-dimensional in frequency, spectra, and isotopes. Between each of the colors of the rainbow, we can create millions of other combinations. This can also be done with musical scales within our range of hearing, 20 to 20,000 hertz. This is what leads to the diversity of our planet and our universe. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that, when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Romans chapter 1, 20 through 23. Okay, so maybe we need more scientific proof here based on experimentation. So, let us look to the experiments of Joel Sternheimer and how he is using audio sound to resonate molecules. He claims to be able, using simple physics, to translate into audible vibrations of music the quantum vibrations that occur at the molecular level as a protein is being assembled from its constituent amino acids. Each musical note is a multiple of original frequencies that occur when amino acids join the protein chain. The length of a note corresponds to the real time it takes for each amino acid to come after the next, says Sternheimer, who studied quantum physics and mathematics at Princeton University in New Jersey. Sternheimer claims that in his experience, tomatoes exposed to his tunes grow 2.5 times as big as controls. Some were sweeter as well, he says. So since God's spoken word was the institution of all created matter and substance, and we tie that together with Penrose tiling and notes and everything on the electromagnetic spectrum from infinity hertz is related by octaves, then this is ample evidence to show that the process by which God did speak all things into existence was essentially governed by the laws of music and mathematics. All the sciences then, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, etc., should follow the same patterns because they are the outcropping of the foundation of music and mathematics. To prove this, with respect to what we read about Joel Sternheimer, I will show how musical relationships easily supplant and supersede Darwinian theory and natural selection. First, we must understand some vibrational basics. A note is a single tone, pitch, or frequency. A doubling of any note produces a higher note with the same pitch, as in middle C and high C on a piano. This is known as an octave. Octaves go on forever above and below our musical scale. They are simply halvings or doublings of frequency. 1 drum beat per second is what middle C sounds like 8 octaves down. By some strange coincidence, there are 50 octaves from a beat of 1 per second, the lowest range of the human heartbeat, to the frequency of visible light. A chord is any 2 notes or pitches played simultaneously. All chords produce certain sounds, which are unique because whenever 2 notes are played together, a third note or beat is also heard. This third note is not inherent in either note, but only as a synergetic consequence of their unity, constructed in the brain. Before I move on, it needs to be understood right here and seen as we go along that this is exactly what Mendel's work on genetics shows. This is also the proof that the transitional sequences of evolution are merely examples of tunes being spoken or sung by a creator. The transitional sequences are merely examples of musical scales. This means that all the fossils are the physical proof of creation, not evolution. 2 notes played together produce a third, and you will see how important the correlation between the two become here in a moment. But by merely playing 2 notes together, as you will see, you literally get an infinity of possible iterations and combinations. From these 2 notes, you could literally create all the diversity of all living and non-living material in the universe. But we have never heard a symphony of only 2 notes. So, what if God were singing something akin to Mozart or the music of Star Wars? Hold that thought. 2 notes played together produce a third. 3 notes played together produce 3 other notes from the various combinations of 2 notes, 4 notes produce 6 new tones, 5 notes produce 11, and so on. The notes may not always sound like musical pitches because their frequencies may be below 16 cycles per second, the minimum frequency that sounds like a note to our ears. The secondary notes, children, or second-level iteration. Repeating sequence of the first notes interact with one another and create tertiary notes, grandchildren, or third-level iterations and so on, to infinity, so that the combinations become rather astounding. This is why mankind does not need a naturalistic process like microevolution to explain diversity. It is completely false. The playing of any 2 single notes together in musical analysis creates an infinity of other tones. Here is a simple diagram relating Mendel's work. Couple this with the fact that in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, the same tone can be played in higher or lower octaves, such as high C or low C. Then from each octave you would get a different characteristic, i.e. color, shape, etc., even characteristics beyond our 5 senses. This would be your emery, similar to the periodic table of elements and their spectroscopy. Of course, this also relates back to holography, and in the next comments it refers to harmonic series. This follows still the ideas presented behind Penrose tiling and what I will describe in a moment about Koch curves. The notes within any note are the iteration of the harmonic series, wherein if we could hear down into it, any note contains all other notes by way of this harmonic subdivision. But each new subdivision has less volume than the previous and fades into the background after so many. Even so, a part of you can sense the presence of nearly subliminal notes. It is even possible that the brain picks up on the pattern and carries the iterations out farther than hearing actually allows. Pluck a string, and you get a complex wave composed of all the harmonics of the root note. The different standing waves corresponding to different fractions are called harmonics. The same harmonic father, children, grandchildren. Subdivisioning that happens in musical notes and chords happens in any situation where vibrational events are intersecting, including atomic vibration. The wave interactions and phase cancellations that happen in a musical chord are the very same ones that govern ways which molecules will bond or repel, which waves on the ocean will pass through others, and what gravitational orbits the planets fall into, among other things. So, what is the mathematical relationship between atomic mass and frequency? Henry Moseley measured the frequency of X-rays, 30 quintillion hertz given off by the elements of the periodic table. One of the graphs, titled Square Root of X-ray Frequency versus Relative Atomic Mass, shows a very nice, relatively straight line similar to the ascending notes of a major scale on the piano staff. The conversion factor for changing any molecular mass to frequency mc2 divided by h is 2.252342718 times 10, 23 hertz. The conversion factor for changing frequency to atomic mass is 4.439821667 times 10, 24 hertz, which divided by mc squared. If you have understood the picture of the step-by-step process so far, then these numbers will make sense. If you are taking a wave nest of frequency matter, and you are changing that matter back into its long wave, then that number is going to be very large. If, on the other hand, you want to take the long wave and braid pack, spin it into a wave nest, and make it a compact piece of matter, then the number would become very compact or small. With these conversions, you can take any amount of atomic mass for any piece of matter, including yourself, and calculate its corresponding frequency. If you divide that frequency down by octaves to the range of our hearing, you should come up with a corresponding note on the musical staff. For example, if we took the periodic table and transposed all the elements to a relatively accurate corresponding scale on the piano, the table would fit near F4 sharp down to a very low inaudible infrasonic frequency of 3 hertz. While this is below what a piano may be able to play, there are other instruments that can play frequencies a piano could not. The Earth has a frequency of about 79 hertz. Actually, this is where all music comes from. Artistic people seem to have a better connection to it than the normal layman. Nonetheless, I believe that the point has been made that mass and sound have a direct physical, mathematical, and musical relationship, which is why so many sounds are music to your ears, and the science behind the art of feng shui and all architecture. Feng shui, pronounced in English as Feng Shui or Feng Shui is the ancient Chinese practice of placement and arrangement of space to achieve harmony with the environment. The literal translation is wind water. Feng Shui involves the use of geographical, psychological, philosophical, mathematical, aesthetic, and astrological concepts in relation to space and energy flow. It is not simply a decorating style, but a discipline with guidelines compatible with many different techniques of architectural planning. An individual is usually not described as having bad or incorrect feng shui, but since the practice is linked to QI, a person's energy can either deplete or add to the energy of his or her surroundings. The space can also affect the individual, especially in matters of luck, health, and prosperity. Feng Shui is not only a practice that is related to physical space, but also to the inhabitants of the space itself, as both are interconnected. This will become more important as we see God setting stars into place on day 4 and literally rearranging the universe into perfect order from beginning to end, so that everything would keep all of humanity in awe and amazement, with a constant desire to want to know more about its beauty, which consequently is the attitude of anyone who views the universe or nature with eyes wide open. This then, from the ancient art of architecture, is another proof for the existence of God, because nobody appreciates a random mess. From sound, the command of God's voice, which we have determined is light, the elements came forth from the commingling of the electric field and the magnetic field of the universe to create the dry land from out of the midst of the waters under the firmament. The Genesis cosmology no longer then becomes a poetic flight of fancy, but a mathematically and experimentally precise feat of engineering by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Vegetation, the beginnings of biology. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. Genesis 1:11-13. So here is the disconnect. When we look at all the diversity in shape, in number, in color, in kind, I believe our first instinct is to think no way that God could just say a simple phrase and all that come popping up. And the religionist counter is that God can do anything. While this is true to some extent, as he cannot be dissonant to himself, most materialistic-minded people would simply humph and walk off thinking what a fool. Well, the truth is, it is just that simple. As I have shown, there is only one number that will be needed to control all plant growth and diversity on the planet, and that is the phi ratio, or 0.618034. That ratio will account for the distance, height, and 360 degrees girth of all upward and outward growth. To account for the infinite diversity of color and shape of plants, you only need 2 shapes, a kite and a dart. This leads to a Penrose tiling effect for all plant, and in the future, insect, animal, and human life on the planet. Also, we now know that all God needs to do is talk at different frequency, pitch, and volume to change the electrical patterns within the ZPE field, which is everywhere all at once, to jostle and mix, if you will, everything together. It doesn't get much easier than that. But why is vegetation so important? As I have stated earlier, it is the receptor of all the energy coming from what will be set in place on day 4, the sun. Chlorophyll is the lifeblood of the planet. It is the source of energy for everything that is animate on the earth. Chlorophyll is the major light-absorbing pigment in green plants. It is located within the membrane of the chloroplasts, which are small green organelles found in plant cells. Chlorophyll is a large molecule composed of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and magnesium coordinated with 4 central nitrogen atoms. It functions to initiate photosynthesis, a complex biochemical pathway in which solar energy is used to convert water and carbon dioxide to glucose and other carbohydrates. Chlorophyll is the green pigment of plants, which initiates photosynthesis by absorbing energy from sunlight and transferring this energy to other molecules. Chlorophyll causes carbon dioxide and water to combine into glucose. Chlorophyll contains enzymes and superoxide dismutase, a copper-containing protein found in mature red blood cells. This enzyme decomposes superoxide radicals in the body into a more manageable form, thereby helping to slow down the aging process. One of the major differences between chlorophyll and hemin is that chlorophyll contains magnesium, while the hemin molecule contains iron as its central atom. Owing to the close molecular resemblance between chlorophyll and hemoglobin, scientist Hans Miller suspected that chlorophyll is nature's blood-building element for all plant eaters and humans. He wrote, "Chlorophyll has the same fast blood-building effect as iron in animals made anemic." Interesting to note here is that chlorophyll is composed of simple inert elements from the periodic table, and notice the similarity to DNA. So how did God get all that biology to just spring forth? Well, if you understand the relationship of sound frequency to matter, and the sound frequency music of all vibration in the universe to mathematics' golden mean series, then you will easily understand how inert elements come together to form the foundation of all biology. DNA. As stated here, the DNA molecule, the program for all life, is based on the golden mean section. It measures 34 angstroms long by 21 angstroms wide for each full cycle of its double helix spiral. 34 and 21, of course, are numbers in the Fibonacci series, and their ratio, 1.6190476, closely approximates PHI, 1.6180339. This form of DNA has a 2 groove in its spirals, with a ratio of phi in the proportion of the major groove to the minor groove, or roughly 21 angstroms to 13 angstroms. A cross-sectional view from the top of the DNA double helix forms a decagon. A decagon is, in essence, 2 pentagons with one rotated 36 degrees from the other, so each spiral of the double helix must trace out the shape of a pentagon. See Penrose tiling. The ratio of the diagonal of a pentagon to its side is phi to 1. So no matter which way you look at it, even in its smallest element, DNA and life is using phi in the golden section. This chart indicates the detection of signal bursts with a frequency of 1.618033 Hz. This frequency, sometimes called the golden ratio, these signals appear with no clear relationship with any known source. They are not related to solar anomalies or any known weather pattern. They do vary in amplitude or intensity and are irregular with their timing. These signals have been detected on a global scale and are of extreme interest. So, the construction of every biological organism on this planet will be closely related to this frequency of the golden ratio. This then becomes the staff of the sheet music, which is the blueprint of God for creating all life on the planet in all of its diversity. This reason is why music is such an important aspect of education. DNA is comprised of adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. RNA is comprised of adenine, guanine, uracil, and cytosine. Not surprisingly, all of these substances are comprised of inert elements, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, except adenine has no oxygen. Using the process earlier of changing atomic molecular mass to frequency and finding its corresponding notes on the piano, we find approximately that adenine equals G3, guanine equals A3, cytosine equals, and thymine equals F3 sharp. This is the same as a D major scale. The great thing about music is that any scale can be manipulated by minute degrees to form an innumerable amount of variations whose range can be infinitely high or any frequency greater than 0, meaning the information-carrying capacity of DNA is infinite and can change an infinite amount of times without ever repeating itself like Fay and Penrose tilings. RNA, however, does not have this capability, and there is absolutely no reason to believe it ever did except to fit a puzzle piece into a space it doesn't belong. Actually, the structure of RNA, which substitutes uracil for thymine, yields a scale on the piano comprised of only G3, A3, E3, E3. meaning it can only carry the information of that cord over and over again. The RNA backbone is likewise made of inert elements, hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Yet it also yields a musical note EZ on the piano. However, the backbone of DNA is also made of hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon, but in addition to that, also phosphorus similar to chlorophyll, except phosphorus equals magnesium, and heme except phosphorus equals iron minus oxygen. This configuration yields a note C on the piano. Although the structure here can be seen as only slightly different from RNA to DNA, these differences are very important. This type of construction yields the fact that RNA could never carry the information needed to create life. But play them together, as they are designed to do, as right-handed and left-handed, and what an amazing masterpiece can be created. RNA would be the equivalent to the chords of the bass clef, and DNA would be the scales of the treble clef. DNA is a machine that creates tunneling of information that travels faster than the speed of light. Predictably, the understanding and development of Phi ratio construction could lead to quantum tunneling experiments to break the light barrier with full, coherent, perfect transmissions. DNA is constructed to allow only harmonic sounds through it. Anything dissonant will create a mutation. This mutation will not be an advantage but a defect, as it will throw the whole system into an imbalance. This can be seen today as we find DNA defects lead to major diseases later on in life, effectively altering the lifespan of the organism. In the first 7 days of creation, this would not have been possible. If one defect, at any time, happened during the laying of the foundation, which would support the ultimate goal for creation, man, it would have destroyed the whole system. Every calculation had to be perfect, because of the instantaneous nature at which everything was coming together, similar to those who built the pyramid and Sphinx. But let's look at some more mathematical proof of this creation, not of just vegetation, but of all creation. In order to do this, we will look at the supposedly random branching of plant life. The concept of an L system, developed in 1968 by Aristide Lindenmayer, was initially used in the study of formal languages, but soon came to be recognized as a mechanism for modeling various plant-like structures. The idea of repetition is inherent in L systems, and so have fractal properties. An L system is a scheme for rewriting strings of symbols, words, formed out of a very limited alphabet. The rewriting takes place by replacing certain strings of characters being replaced, and so complex strings are built up from simple strings, the complex strings containing replications of the basic strings. To give geometric life to a string of characters, we interpret a character string as a sequence of geometric drawing instructions using a scheme that is commonly referred to as turtle graphics. The geometric object is formed of the trail left by a turtle that follows very specific but brief motions. When many of these motions are put together, because the character string is very long, we obtain a geometric object that would be very difficult to describe by standard Euclidean geometry. To specify a particular L system, we include an axiom or initial string, the angle by which the turtle may turn, one or more production rules, which indicate what string replacements are to be made. Beginning with the axiom, the process of applying the production rules is repeated to form successively longer strings. The string rewriting stops after a specified number of steps, and the resulting string is then interpreted by a turtle graphics processor. The turtle graphics processor can be a human, in case the final string is short, or more commonly, a computer program. By introducing the branching symbols and by changing the axiom, angle, and/or production rules, we can alter the finished geometric object so that it looks considerably more plant-like. The first several steps give us the following geometric images. At step N, there are 6 turtle steps required, so that step 4 requires 62, equals 1,296 steps. Minor variations of this L system give us other plant-like images. Even more realism can be added to our plant-like images by including the ability to branch in three-dimensional space rather than in just 2 dimensions. DNA is an L-system scheme for rewriting strings of symbols, chromosomes, words, formed out of a very limited alphabet, AGTC. The rewriting takes place by replacing certain strings of character, DNA, in a word by other strings of characters, RNA. These replacements often utilize repetitions of the string of characters being replaced, and so complex strings are being built up from simple strings. The complex strings of chromosomes, proteins, hemoglobin, yes, even present in yeast and some plant life, chlorophyll, etc., are built up from simple strings. The complex strings containing replications of the basic strings, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. What is the most completely random, as we have always perceived it, event that happens every year, is easily observable by everyone and never repeats itself? How about snowfall and the formation of frost on your window, or the growth of crystals? Fractals are geometric objects that are self-similar and have detail on arbitrarily small scale. Fractals can be created easily by a process known as iterated subset replacement. We begin with a simple geometric set, such as a line segment. At stage 1, we replace the line segment with another shape, perhaps consisting of several line segments in a certain pattern. We then create stage 2 by applying the stage 1 replacement to every line segment in stage 1. We iterate this subset replacement scheme indefinitely, and the limiting set is an instance of a fractal. This is much easier to visualize than it is to describe in words. Since the actual fractal is the limit of an infinite sequence of steps, we can draw only an approximation of the true fractal. This fractal is known as the Koch curve. Notice that if you were to magnify any portion of the Koch curve, you would see miniature replicas of the Koch curve contained within itself. This idea of self-similarity is a hallmark of fractals. Putting 3 of these Koch curves together, we obtain the Koch snowflake. So what do snowflakes and Koch curves have to do with plants and everything else in creation? Everything. First, I have shown here that everything in creation is nothing more than the harmonic series of the One, God, who is manifested in a chord of 3 persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. Described by science as EM, light, sound, gravity, and ZPE, magnetism. Secondly, everything in the universe is nothing more than waves, and their harmonic interactions governed by mathematical principles demonstrated by the laws of music. Third, there is not one single thought, action, phenomena, creation, or event in the universe happening from the beginning of time until the end of time that cannot fit into this pattern and analysis. Fourth, everything that exists has a frequency at which it will naturally resonate when disturbed, including the ZPE field and the universe itself. Fifth, everything is harmony or dissonance, and dissonance automatically cancels out. This is the only true natural selection. Sixth, the variations of the finches which Darwin observed are nothing more than a musical scale of variation within that kind. This goes for all kinds of created beings in the whole earth, including humans, and all non-living entities in the universe also. Each kind, then, also becoming part of its own musical scale. The musical scale is not an accident, it is a natural consequence of pure mathematics and nature. Hence why music is the universal language, and during the Renaissance was thought to be the voice of God. Music is vibrational physics and math that is sensed almost as a language by the ear, brain combination. From these mathematical concepts, we can understand that stage sub-zero of creation was the void. Stage 0 was the input of the perfectly still ZPE field, the life force of God, the Holy Spirit. Stage 1, the creation of waves or light, was accomplished by the creative process of iterated subset replacement, which is nothing more than a command. Webster's dictionary defines iterated as to utter or do again or repeatedly. The moving of one day to the next was the stoppage of each day's string rewriting. The terms "and it was so" and God saw that it was good, is the description of this stop point and the fact that he was the first turtle graphics producer. Each new day of creation was the specification of a new L system whose initial string or axiom would be the previous day's construction or layer. Each new day then would be the next day's iterated subset replacement, which makes everything that has ever existed part of a 7-stage Koch curve. Wherein, if we were able to put that Koch curve under a microscope, we would see the miniature replicas contained within it ad infinitum. We, mankind, has only seen this creation from the bottom up or from the inside outward, whereas God was looking at it from the perspective of being outside of it, as me playing with Lego blocks as a child. We see from our standing position inside a selection of the Koch curve, down to the infinitely smaller portions of the curve, to the infinitely large portions of the curve, but we can't see the whole curve. This is why we cannot see God. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in him, and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. And we have seen and testify that the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world. 1 John 4:11-14. For God so loved the world, the whole creation, that he gave his only begotten Son, the one created in verse 2 of the Genesis creation record, but born of Mary in the flesh, see John 1, that whosoever believes in him should not perish because of their separation, dissonance from God and creation, but have everlasting life, John 3:16. What science has never done, and perhaps before this document was not capable of, is to ascend outside the box to see all of creation through the eyes of God. Why do I say that? Why do I interject with scripture from such a profoundly accepted as non-scientific text? Because it contains all science. What science has never done, and perhaps before this document was not capable of, is to ascend outside the box to see all of creation through the eyes of God. Why do I say that? Why do I interject with scripture from such a profoundly accepted as non-scientific text? Because it contains all science. Want proof? Need a link? In my Chemistry 120 class lecture today, I had this epiphany. The geometry of chemistry is in crystals and chemical structure, which in mathematics is L systems, 3D Penrose tiling, and the Fibonacci series. Thus, we have just moved backwards from geometry to chemistry. Going further backwards, we also see that the phase changes in chemistry are based on temperature and pressure. And, as we have noted before, heat equals frequency, and frequency equals sine wave. Thus, we have moved backward from chemistry to physics, because in physics this is known as electricity and magnetism. And so, we arrive back at the beginning with the first axiom, the initial string, the first turtle tracks as it moved outward in all directions, i.e., the angle by which the turtle may turn, let there be light, and the only production rule which indicates what string replacements are to be made. And God said, "This is the only path of true knowledge, the ascension out of the box." This is why I made the statement earlier that we have never actually invented anything. Everything is the result of the Koch curve repeating itself, rearranging itself ad infinitum. As one of the wisest men to ever be recorded said, "All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new, it has been already in the ages before us'?" Ecclesiastes 1:8-10. We must begin to realize that everything is connected either in dissonance or harmony. This is what Young's double slit experiment revealed. The dissonance cancels out immediately, or in the mercy of God for us over time. The harmony is everlasting. Our knowledge must become the same, harmonic with creation basics, in order to move to more harmony instead of decaying into dissonance and eventually destroying all life on the planet by upsetting the balance of forces. Well, on to day 4, and the creation of the stars.